Hey, what's up, guys? It's Tips, and recently I had the opportunity to sit down and speak with Alive, one of the best vanilla WoW warlocks in the world. Alive is just a really genuine guy, a really cool guy, and he knows a lot about vanilla WoW, specifically warlocks, mages, raiding. I mean, the guy has been in top tier guilds for the past number of years, and recently he started up a Discord channel specifically designed for the community in which he plans on answering any of your guys' questions. So if you've ever had a question about warlocks, mages, high-end raiding, raid leading, guild composition, any question about vanilla WoW, believe me, this is the resource to go to. This guy knows his stuff, and you're going to be seeing that in this next video here. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start the deep dive. I'll see you guys soon. Ladies and gentlemen, everybody that's watching right now, please help me welcome Alive, one of the greatest warlock prodigies in the classic WoW scene. Can we get some claps in the chat for Alive? He's here to tell us today how to play warlocks in a PvE environment in classic WoW. He's got a lot of experience. He's been an officer for Progress, one of the best raiding guilds in the world. He's cleared nags. He's played private servers for, what, 5 years now, Alive?
About 5 years, yeah.
About 5 years now. A lot of experience. Very smart guy, very cool guy, and he's kind of new to the content creation scene as well. As you can see, I've left his Twitch link below his panel, but he's still kind of starting off. He still hasn't really, gotten the swing of things. He hasn't started streaming yet, but feel free to toss him a follow on Twitch if you guys like what he has to say. But
I actually should be having my mage video go up in 5 to 10 minutes.
There you go, a mage PvE guide, and he has a warlock PvE guide already up on his YouTube channel, which I'll link in just a second here. But yes, the man is a very accomplished WoW player, and he's getting ready to make some guides for us. So,
thank you.
Let's go ahead and get started, dude. Let's go ahead and get started. So,
sure.
Talk to me about the warlock, man. What is the warlock?
Warlocks are one of the few spellcasters that are viable in Classic. The spellcasters that are really viable in competitive raiding are Mage and Warlock. Boomkin and Elemental Shaman don't really exist. Typically, Warlock is a little bit less powerful than Mage, and it's a bit more volatile. Warlock has a higher damage ceiling than a Frost Mage. However, since Warlock doesn't have any inherent threat reduction or hit rating, the damage can be pretty volatile. You can crit a bunch of times and do a bunch of damage, or you can miss a bunch of times and do no damage.
Okay, so it's kind of like, it's got a little bit of RNG going with it. Is that correct?
Yeah. At the beginning of the game, until you get some Bloodvine and some gear later on that we'll talk about.
Absolutely. So where would you rank warlocks on like the grand spectrum of DPS? If there's somebody out there that wants to play a really good DPS class, would you recommend warlock to them?
Warlocks are very good late game, but early game they're not that good. They're probably ranked as the lowest out of all the competitive DPS classes early. They have a good kit, but they lack base stats.
Give me an example.
So like, let's look at Mage, the other caster counterpart. In the Mage talent tree, you have Elemental Precision, giving them 6% hit on Frost and Fire spells. So regardless of what spec they are, they have 6% inherent hit. And they also have threat reduction with the talent point Frost Channeling. Warlocks don't have either of these. Both of these classes have 100% increased critical damage, but Warlock only has hit rating on its affliction spells with a talent point suppression. And the only time that's really relevant is when you're putting your curse up or if you have a corruption slot, but your primary damaging spell is going to be destruction spells, so it doesn't really help you at all.
I got you. Okay, so basically, a lot of versatility, a lot of power in the Warlock, but it's all contingent upon multiple things, curses, your spec, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about specs a little bit. The first spec that I want to talk about is the leveling spec. So that's the first thing you're going to be doing as a Warlock. Walk me through the leveling build real quick. Where do I go? What do I spec into as I'm leveling?
All right, so there's a little bit of a variation depending on your play style and if you're playing with a partner. If you're playing solo, you typically want to go into Demonology a bit first, rather than going into Affliction a bit first. And if you're playing with someone, you want to go in Affliction first. Basically, what you're trying to decide is, do I want to rush for Siphon Life and Shadow Mastery, or do I want to rush to get my pet more tanky? So if you're leveling solo, I'd probably put enough talent points down into Master Summoner, Fell Domination, and things like this, especially rushing Improved Voidwalker, because the Voidwalker is actually really, really crappy in Classic WoW. It doesn't hold aggro very well at all, and it uses up its usefulness quite quickly. So rushing Improved Voidwalker pretty quickly is usually the way to go.
Okay, so walk me through it on a step-by-step basis. I've got the talent tree open here from classic.wowhead.com. And walk me through step-by-step. I hit level 10. Where do I put the points in, and where do I progress?
So the first 3 points I would put in is 3 points into Improved Corruption. And you don't put 5 in there right away, because when you use Corruption, you're going to activate a global anyway. And the global is 1.5 seconds. So if you go Improved Corruption 3 points, you get 1.2 second reduction, making the global take as long as it takes to actually cast a spell. Meaning you don't really need it to be any better than that at the current time. And then after that, I'd start going 5 into Demonic Embrace for the increased stamina, and then 3 into Improved Voidwalker. After you get these talent points done, which you should be level 20 at this point, it's kind of up to your discretion. You can go Affliction for a bit more damage if you plan on buying some shadow gear and really beefing up your character. Or if you're playing early on in the server and you're solo leveling and you just want to play it safe, you start going down the Demonology tree.
Okay, let's assume solo leveling, playing it safe.
If I'm solo leveling, I'd probably end up going 2 points into Fell Intellect, so that my Voidwalker has a larger mana pool, so it can do more taunts, more ability. And then after that, 1 point into Fell Domination, and then 4 points into Fell Stamina. And then after this part, you really have to choose, do I want to go all the way to Soul Link, or do I want to start going for some damage? And typically the way I play when I'm solo leveling, I stop here and I start going more into Affliction, putting 2 points into Suppression, 2 points into Improved Drain Soul, 2 points into Improved Life Tap, 1 into Corruption, 1 into Amplify Curse, 3 into Improved Curse of Agony, and then the last one into Improved Corruption. And at this point, you're 39, almost level 40, and you can either get more damage with Nightfall, Siphon Life, etc., or go Soul Link. I'd say if you're ahead of the pack and you're not having a lot of PvP going on, go into the Affliction tree for Shadow Mastery and for Siphon Life. But if you're caught up in the Zerg and there's a lot of PvP going on, go for the Demonology route and go for Soul Link, because nobody wants to fight a Soul Link Warlock.
Absolutely. Yeah, believe me. Believe me, I know firsthand. Okay,
Yeah.
so you would go into Master Summoner or Unholy Power?
I would go into Master Summoner first, and then start going into Unholy Power, 3 out of 5, Demonic Sacrifice, then finish Unholy Power. Then you have 1 more point you have to spend before you can get into Master Demonologist, or 2 more points. And I just put that into Fell Stamina and Fell Intellect to make your pet a little more useful. Then 5 into Master Demonologist, and then 1 into Soul Link. And then you're done the Demonology tree.
Perfect. Okay. There it is right there. Then with the 5 remaining points, how do you finish it off?
You finish it off by just going into Siphon Life. Just go into Nightfall, Grim Reach, and the Affliction tree. 1 more point into Affliction. And you don't actually get into Siphon Life with Soul Link spec. That would be a little bit too good. That's something you do in TBC. But you finish off with 20 points in the Affliction tree usually.
Okay.
The reason we don't go into Destruction is because typically when you're leveling, you don't really sit there and hard cast Shadow Bolt. It's not very mana efficient, and your Shadow Bolt's not doing a considerable amount of damage.
during leveling. You don't use Shadow Bolt during leveling at all.
You can use it in some circumstances, but most of the time, you just want to be putting dots up, wanding, and doing a very consistent, sustained amount of damage.
I got you. So let's run through that scenario real quick. So as we're leveling up, we're putting our points into this build. You know, one of the things Warlocks is very, very famous for is its leveling speed. How many mobs do you pull at a time? Do you pull one mob? Do you pull two mobs? When you pull the mobs, how do you approach it? What pet do you have out? Give me the whole combat scenario for Locks.
It depends. It depends on what level I'm at. Warlocks have a huge array of spells at their disposal: CC spells, damage amplifying spells, etc. So if I'm 40 plus and I have Death Coil and all of these utility spells, I'll probably pull 3 mobs, depending on what the mob's abilities are. If they're normal meleeing mobs, I'll put my Voidwalker on one, put 1 or 2 dots. I'll fear one, put 1 or 2 dots on it. And then I'll have one on me or on my Voidwalker if the Voidwalker AoE taunt is up. If the Voidwalker AoE taunt isn't up, then usually 2 mobs. The more dangerous the mobs, the less you pull at a time.
And is grinding effective at all as a means of leveling for Warlock, or do you prefer just all the way questing?
Grinding is actually really effective as a Warlock if you know how to do it well. As with any cloth class, you die very easily, so the more dangerous you play, the more risky it's going to be for you, because in Classic WoW, corpse walks are really, really bad for leveling. Corpse walks are extremely inefficient. It can take 8-9 minutes just to get back to your body, and then some other alliance or horde or enemy faction can be sitting there waiting for you, camping you. So
I got you. Okay. All right. So at some point you hit level 60. And once you hit level 60, you're going to be doing your pre-raid bis, you're going to be gearing up, all that good stuff, and you're going to be ready to raid. Before we talk about pre-raid bis and gear and everything like that, and by the way, everybody in the chat is asking questions. See, a lot of people are asking questions right now. We'll get to the Q&A section at the very end, so hold on to your questions. I'll ask live all of the questions you guys have, so be wary of that. But level 60, leveling spec no longer as useful. How do you respec for a raid? I understand there are 2 primary raiding specs for Warlocks, right?
yeah, so the 2 primary rating specs are Demonic Sacrifice and SM. Both of them go 21 points into Destruction to get the Ruin talent point. And then other than Ruin, it just depends on what you're going to go for. So typically the better spec, the more damaging spec is Demonic Sacrifice Ruin. And that's going to be a little bit better than its counterpart, SM Ruin. Because it does slightly more shadow damage, and SM Ruin is typically the spec that you run later in the game when you want the increased reach on your affliction spells. However, early game, you usually always have one affliction warlock in your group, because affliction warlocks can keep their demon pets out while raiding. So you keep your imp out and have it phased out so it can't take damage. And you put in your tank group so you can give Blood Pact to your tank, increasing his stamina by 38.
I got you. So you keep up one SM Warlock in the tank group, right?
Correct.
And the rest go DS Ruin. Do they have any rotational difference between the 2 specs?
So depending on how many corruption slots your guild allows you to use, you typically want to prioritize at least one of the corruption slots to your SM Warlock, because he has the Nightfall talent. And while the Demonic Sacrifice Warlock has a bit more shadow damage due to Demonic Sacrifice Succubus, it's slightly more inefficient to not give the Affliction Warlock a chance to proc his Nightfall.
Okay, interesting. So how would I prioritize the talents here? I've got 5 out of 5 to improve Shadow Bolt. Do I put 5 out of 5 into Cataclysm as well?
So no, you put 5/5 improve Shadow Bolt, and then you put 5/5 into. Hold on 1 second. I'm pulling up my talent tree for you. 1 second. Okay, so 5/5 into improve Shadow Bolt, and then you put 5/5 into the talent tree is not loading for me. The one on the left, the fist.
Bane. Okay.
Bane. Yeah, the talent point's not loading for me for some reason.
Are you on Classic Wowhead or on Classic DB?
I'm on Classic Wowhead. All right, here, I just fixed it. All right, so 5/5 into Bane. Sorry about that. 5/5 into Devastation. You're already on it, I can see. 1 into Shadowburn. And then now you have a few different options. You want to go 2/2 into Destructive Reach, because Destructive Reach will give you enough range to outrange a lot of AoE fear abilities like Bellowing Roar on dragons like Nefarian, or Panic from Magmadar and Molten Core. But we need to unlock Ruin. So what most people do now is put 2 points into Cataclysm. However, the 2% mana that you save from Cataclysm is never really reaching a point where it becomes relevant. So what I will do is during Molten Core, I'll put 2 points into Cataclysm and activate Ruin. But once Blackwing Lair comes out, and then on ZG, AQ, etc., I'll take those 2 points out of Cataclysm and put them into Improved Scorch. Or Improved Searing Pain, sorry. And the reason I do that is because the 2% mana reduction isn't really relevant at all. And the amount of times that a good Warlock player should be using Scorch is pretty high. Because there's going to be a lot of times where you're fighting trash, or you're fighting a boss or something like that, and the mob is almost dead, but you realize that you don't have enough time to cast another Shadow Bolt. So instead of casting another Shadow Bolt and having it not go off because the mob is going to die, you try to fit in a Searing Pain at the end instead. And if that Searing Pain crits, that's more DPS for you.
And why is this not as you? Oh, and Molten because fire damage, right?
Yeah. In Molten Core, if you do this, it's just going to say immune.
Yeah, because Searing Pain is fire damage. Okay, very interesting. And then from there you go Ruin.
Yep, Ruin, and then you're done the Destruction Tree. And then when you go for Demonic Sacrifice or SM spec, the Destruction Tree is going to be the exact same.
So both DS Ruin and SM Ruin are the same thing in the Destruction Tree.
Pretty much, and you alter between Cataclysm and Searing Pain depending on what raid or content you're clearing. And then for DS Ruin, we go over to the Demonology Tree, and you put 5 points in Demonic Embrace, 2 points into Improved Healthstone, 3 points into Improved Voidwalker. And a lot of people think that Improved Voidwalker is just a filler talent point. You know, you just put it in there to get to the next tier of talents. That's not actually true. Improved Voidwalker is a DPS increase if used properly. So let's look at a fight where the Warlock is going to take consistent damage and it's unavoidable, like Fire Maw fire damage or Veil fire damage, etc. Any sort of damage that you take is going to cause you to get a pushback on your Shadow Bolt, meaning you're going to lose damage, you're going to lose DPS. So when going into Improved Voidwalker, it increases the shield that you get from the Sacrifice ability by 30%. So if you go to Veil or any sort of fight where you're going to receive damage and get pushback, you can sacrifice the Voidwalker for a 30% bigger shield, meaning during the time that you have that shield, you'll receive no pushback. So after Improved Voidwalker, we go into Fell Domination, and now you get your filler talent points. You just need to get to the next tier. So typically I'll put my points into either Fell Stamina or Fell Intellect. It doesn't really matter. And then you go Master Summoner, 2 out of 2. And then you have more filler talent points. You can put it in Unholy Power, Fell Intellect, Fell Stamina. Doesn't matter. You're going to be sacrificing your pet anyway. You just want to activate enough points to get to Demonic Sacrifice.
Yeah.
And then once you reach Demonic Sacrifice, you're done. You only go 21 points into the Demonology Tree. Next, you go Affliction. In Affliction, you go 5 points into Improved Corruption, 2 points into Suppression, and 2 points into improved life tap, and then you're done.
All right. Let's talk about this in a little bit of detail here. Demonic Sacrifice. So when activated, it sacrifices your summoned demon to grant you an effect that lasts for 30 minutes. The effect is canceled if any demon is summoned. Essentially, it's like Lone Wolf for Warlocks. For those that haven't played Vanilla or play BFA or something. Each pet has its own unique bonus depending on which pet you sacrifice. So Imp increases your fire damage by 15%. Voidwalker restores 3% of your total health every 4 seconds. Succubus increases your shadow damage by 15%. And Fellhunter restores 2% of total mana every 4 seconds. Is there ever a time when you don't pick Succubus?
Yes, actually. So, depending on what strategies you use, you can demonic sacrifice the Imp. So let's say that your guild has full world buffs. You're going into Molten Core. You've got gear. You've got some Blackwing Lair gear. And you're approaching Major Domo. Major Domo, there's a ton of mobs that you need to kill. So if your guild is geared enough and has the strategy practiced, you can actually stack up all of the mobs in the Major Domo fight into one location. If you can stack all those mobs up into one location, you're not really casting Shadow Bolt, and you're not really dotting that much. Your primary DPS that you want to use is just Hellfire. And if you're Hellfiring 80, 90% of the fight, sacrificing the Imp is a little bit better.
Okay.
As for any of the other ones you can sacrifice, there have been arguments made by some people to sacrifice the Fellhunter on long fights to regenerate mana, but that's not really worth it, because if you look at the tooltip for sacrificing the Succubus, it says increased shadow damage by 15%. And when you life tap, the damage that life tap does to the Warlock is shadow damage. So whenever you demonic sacrifice Succubus, your life tap is actually gaining 15% effectiveness and also scales with improved life tap in the affliction tree.
Ah, so it kind of serves as both, a DPS increase and a mana efficiency increase because you get an
Exactly. So
I didn't know that. Yeah.
The more gear you have, the more consumables you use, the more flasks you use, etc., the better the life tap is going to get. That's why you see Warlocks leveling up, life tap does nothing. And then Warlocks and Naxxramas, life tap can take out a third of your health bar.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really
Actually, you can even increase this further. Mages get a talent or an ability called Amplify Magic. And then you can talent into it when you're doing AP Frost spec and get improved Amplify Magic. Amplify Magic increases the magic damage you take and the healing you take. So typically it's a trade-off. You take more damage, you gain more healing. However, as a Warlock, if you have Amplify Magic on you, you're doing magic damage when you life tap, so you get even more mana back.
So there could be a scenario where you have Amplify Magic on, you've got your Succubus sacrificed, you've got your talents in improved life tap, and you've got all your consumables, all your world buffs, your spell damage buffs. You life tap once, it's like a full mana regen, basically.
If you compare a Warlock that does not have Demonic Sacrifice Succubus up, does not have consumables, does not have Flask, does not have Amplify Magic. If you compare a Warlock that has all of those things to a Warlock that doesn't, the Warlock that has those things early game, when you have low gear, is going to be life tapping for almost double them. And if you're life tapping half of amount that all the other Warlocks are life tapping, that means that they're spending double the globals, which means they're losing out on DPS time.
Absolutely. That's a really nifty strategy. I honestly had no idea. But that's really cool. This is the DS Ruin spec, and you said this is technically the stronger of the two specs, albeit marginally.
Yeah. So the SM Ruin spec excels more for clearing trash, because you can multi-dot a bunch of different things. Your dots are a bit stronger with Curse of Agony. You can get Nightfall. It's pretty decent for trash. But Demonic Sacrifice has a bunch more utility by being able to sacrifice the Imp when you need to, by having Fell Domination to instantly summon a Voidwalker, sacrifice it for a shield, and then summon a Succubus, Demonic Sacrifice that, and then you're ready for a fight. So there's a lot of different tips and tricks you can use in Demonic Sacrifice. However, a lot of people will end up going SM Ruin later on in AQ because the increased range on your affliction spells helps a lot. There's more chances to multi-dot like Battle Guard Sartura or like Bug Trio. You can put Curse of Agony if you're not assigned to Curse of Recklessness or any of the other amplifying curses. You can put Curse of Agony on one of the off bosses, one of the bosses that are marked as X or Moon or whatever.
I got you. Okay, so a lot more multi-dot opportunity as SM Ruin in AQ. Let's go over the SM Ruin tree. Is there anything else in the DS Ruin tree you want to point out before we go on?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
So for the Affliction tree, you want to put 5 points into Improved Corruption, 5 into Suppression, 2 into Improved Life Tap, 1 into Amplify Curse.
I'm sorry, 5 points into Suppression, how many into Corruption?
5.
5, okay, yeah.
2 into Improved Life Tap, 1 into Amplify Curse, 3 into Improved Curse of Agony, 2 into Grim Reach, 2 into Nightfall, 1 into Siphon Life. And then now we have a little bit of options. We haven't quite unlocked Shadow Mastery, which is what the spec is named after, but there aren't really any damage increasing abilities left in the talent tree. You could say Improved Drain Soul is a damage increase because whenever you kill something, you get more mana, which means less life taps. However, Improved Drain Soul only counts if you're the one who does the last damaging hit to kill the mob. And when you're in a 40-man raid, that's unlikely. So typically what we have our Warlocks do is go 3 into Improved Curse of Weakness so that we can amplify Curse of Weakness on any fights that we need to, like Chromagus when he hits Enrage, or any sort of boss like that where we're trying to have a more squishy tank with more threat, but we want to still reduce the damage the boss is dealing. And then you can put 1 into Curse of Exhaustion, unlock Shadow Mastery, 5 into Shadow Mastery, and boom, spec's done.
And the other 21 points were in the Destruction tree.
Correct.
5 into Shadow Bolt, 5 into Bane, I think 1 into Soulburn, right?
Once you put the 21 points into Destruction, the spec is complete.
Okay. So let's talk about curses, because you talked about Curse of Agony and multi-dotting with SM Ruin.
Sure.
Let's talk about Warlock curses. Can you explain to us how the curses function and what opportunities you have to use the non-traditional debuff curses?
Okay, so there's only 16 debuff slots in Classic WoW. So Classic WoW is all about maximizing your raid's damage output. As a lot of people know, Classic WoW raiding, it's not like raiding Mythic Plus raids or anything like that. Some of the bosses are hard, but most of the bosses are pretty simple, especially in the earlier raids. So it's all about getting as much damage as you can and clearing the dungeon as fast as you can. This is where curses come into play. You can't just spam Curse of Doom, Curse of Agony, etc., because every single debuff slot out of the 16 debuff slots has to mean something. Typically, you can't ever use, in a high-end guild, you can't use Curse of Doom, Curse of Agony, because there are debuffs that are going to do more damage than that. You want to use Curse of Agony on mobs that are not the skull target, not the primary target. For example, let's say you're in Encourage and you pull a bug pack that has flares and things like this. You have to separate the bug pack because you don't want all your melee to get feared. You don't want mind flays going out, etc. Well, since all of these mobs are spread out, the warriors don't have a chance to cleave. The rogues don't have a chance to blade flurry. There's a lot of AoE missing. However, the warlock doesn't have any problems with that. He just tab targets and puts Corruption, Curse of Agony, whatever dots you want on as many targets as you want. Although when you look at a boss like Gar or Baron Geddon, you don't want to put Curse of Agony or anything like that up. The only curses you really want are Curse of Recklessness, Curse of Elements, and Curse of Shadows, because that's going to increase your raid's damage more than a Curse of Agony would.
Hello? Hello? Oh, there you go. Okay, sorry, my mic got disabled. Okay, so definitely a lot more multi-dotting capabilities with SM Ruin and interesting explanation of the curses. Um, Curse of Agony takes up a debuff slot, though, correct?
Correct.
So I guess my question is, uh, why would you be able to put it up on multiple targets? Is it just because you won't be able to cleave those targets or something like that?
Well, okay, so let's say we have a trash pool, and there's 6 mobs in the trash pool. The melee and everyone are typically going to focus the most threatening target. You usually don't spread all your raid's damage 2 on each mob or anything like that. You focus 1 at a time. So let's say your raid leader marks something with a skull and marks something with an X, and the other 4 mobs are whatever marks there are. Put your long dots like Curse of Agony on the mobs that are not marked as skull or X, because the skull target is going to have the 16 debuff slots that are assigned, the ones that are important: Curse of Elements, Sunder Armor, etc. So if you put Curse of Agony on the skull target, you're probably going to get a bit of feedback from your raid leader saying, hey, don't do that. But if you put it on the mobs that aren't being focused, by the time you are focusing them, Curse of Agony is already going to be fallen off, and it has already done its damage.
Okay. Very good explanation. That's definitely going to increase a lot of people's DPS, knowing when to apply that multi-dot.
I hope so. There's a lot of bad Warlock players.
There you go. So as we talked about the builds a little bit, is there anything you want to talk about real quick about SM Ruin? Anything extra? Any small tips or tricks? Or
Typically, like I said, it's better on trash, but you don't really do this spec early for the trash, because in Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, most of the trash packs, you don't really have a chance to multi-dot. Like, let's look at Molten Core. The trash packs that you're typically pulling are 1 Core Hound or 2 Molten Giants, or it's usually 1 or 2 mobs. So you don't really have a chance to multi-target or multi-dot a bunch of different mobs because you have 1 Skull, 1 X. And usually the trash mobs in these dungeons die a lot faster. So even if you do get to multi-dot, your target that you're dotting is going to die when your dot is only 50% through, not really making it worth your time. You'd rather just Shadow Bolt. You don't really have a chance to use your dots to their full effect until AQ and Naxxramas, when there's more trash to clear. The trash has more HP. It takes longer to kill, and so on.
got you. Okay, so it's kind of it's something you do a little bit later on. Most warlocks do, but there's still a spot putting that blood pact on the tank and the tanking group. But let's go ahead and move on now that we have our talents situated. We're level 60. Let's talk about warlock gearing a little bit. And warlock gearing is very multifaceted, if I understand correctly. It's contingent upon which dungeons are out, especially things like Dire Maul and stuff.
So
yeah.
So on the guides that I've written and the guides I've made for YouTube, I've specifically avoided gearing and stat weights, because it's hard to get into that without knowing the items that Blizzard plans on releasing and when they're releasing it. And I don't want to produce any false information. So if we look at the Prebis list, I can give you some variations of Prebis, but it really just depends on what's going to be out at what time.
Let's assume that we go with Blizzard's content release schedule for Classic, the one that they've currently presented already.
Sure, but that doesn't say if rank 14 caster weapons are going to be out. That doesn't say if rank 10 blue gear is going to be updated, and things like
that. I got you. Then let's go with some hypotheticals then.
Sure, present one.
So let's say. Sorry, I'm just trying to find your classic guide on classic Wowhead. Do you have a link?
Yeah, I can link it to. Yeah.
All right, yeah, absolutely. So, guys, Alive has actually written up a comprehensive Warlock class guide on classic.wowhead.com, including going to include a lot of what we say today. It might include some things that we don't say today. So if you don't want to go back and watch this VOD for like 2 hours again, he just linked it in the chat right now. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on the screen here real quick just to follow along. Is
That, and I have a mage guide up currently, and my mage video should be coming out before the interview.
There you go. There you go. All right. So, we just finished talking about talents here. Look at that. Look. Look at that detail, dude. Look at that breakdown of all the We totally forgot to talk about races, by the way. You want to go into that real quick?
Yeah, sure. The more details, the better.
All right, let's do it. Races. Which race do I pick on Alliance and Horde?
Okay, so on Alliance, the only options that you have are human and gnome, and there's not a huge game-breaking difference between the two, but the better one always is going to be gnome. And this is not only due to the base stats, which I have a chart listed there, but it's more so due to the racials. Gnome gets a racial called Expansive Mind, increasing your intellect by 5%. And this isn't just your base intellect. This is intellect from buffs, from consumables, from gear, and so on. So the longer you go into the game, the more raid gear you get, the more progressed your character gets, the more this 5% intellect becomes crucial. And for Warlocks, every 60 intellect you get equals 1% crit, in addition to increased mana pool size. Humans, on the other hand, have 5% increase to stats as well, but they only have 5% increase to spirit. And spirit's not really a relevant stat to Warlock.
Why not? Why not?
Well, spirit is out of combat mana and health regen. In combat, it's severely nerfed. And we don't really have any talents like evocation on a mage that scales off a spirit, or the healing that you get in a holy tree from a priest. We don't have any talent that says this amount of spirit becomes this amount of spell power or anything like that. It's not really something that benefits what we're trying to do.
I got you. Okay. And obviously you have life tap as well, so it's like, why do you need spirit if you're just life tapping, right?
Yeah. On Horde side, however, it's a bit harder to say which class is better. If we're looking at just purely PvE content, I would argue Undead. Undead has slightly more intellect on their base stats than Orc by 1, which is not very relevant. However, in the racials, Undead has increased shadow resistance, which is good for twins tanking, and it also has Will of the Forsaken. And most people think Will of the Forsaken is just a PvP talent, which is not true. There's going to be a lot of times in raids where you might be out of position or you might be in position, but you still receive a fear, like Bug Trio, Nefarian, Magmadar, etc. And let's say you get feared and an Orc Warlock gets feared. If you're able to break the fear or become immune before the fear even goes off, you're going to do exponentially more damage than any other caster that's not an undead, because they're going to be running around in circles while you're pumping shadow bolts for 6-7 more seconds than they are. Orcs, on the other hand, they have two racials that are relevant: hardened skin and command. Command increases pet damage by 5%. However, most times you aren't going to be raiding with your pet out, since you're going to be demonic sacrifice spec. And you could argue that, well, the Orc Warlock could be the SM Warlock, and he could have his Imp out. That's true. But Imp damage, Imp casts Firebolt, which means in MC it's not really going to do anything significant. And even later on, there's no way to increase your pet's damage. There's no scaling way. There's only a few talent points, and then there's Black Book in Blackwing Lair. And none of those things are really worth it. And even if you were to use your Imp and phase it in rather than phasing it out, it'll die to a lot of bosses, such as Veil, dying to fire damage, Firemaw, dying to fire damage, etc. Most times people go Orc Warlock is for Hardened Skin. Hardened Skin is 25% increased chance to resist a stun, which isn't so relevant in PvE, but it's great in PvP. In PvP, resisting a 5 combo point kidney shot is amazing and totally screws over a rogue. But in PvE, it doesn't really bring anything to the table, especially if you're positioned properly.
Yeah. So what would you say, what would you pick for PvE, like just from the PvE perspective, what would you pick as a race on Horde for Warlock?
I would pick Undead.
Will of the Forsaken.
And someone in chat said Imp can keep world buffs. And that's true. As long as you don't dismiss your Imp, he'll get world buffs alongside of you, any sort of aura-based world buffs. But even still, there's nothing to really amplify its damage percentage-wise or give it spell power or anything like that. And it doesn't, even gaining 10% crit or however many world buffs that you end up gaining isn't enough to make it extremely significant to the point where you must go orc.
So it's more supplemental than anything else.
Correct.
So undead for a horde, ideally gnome for alliance, it sounds like.
Yeah, but really, if you're a good warlock player, race doesn't matter that much. A good warlock that plays human is going to beat a bad warlock that plays gnome. The racials help, but they're not game breaking. It's not like it's impossible to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, play what you want, guys. It's not going to make the difference of whether or not you kill Kel'Thuzad by playing an undead warlock versus something else. You know what I mean? Absolutely. But we kind of went back to races because we glossed over it. Let's keep pushing forward and talk about kind of pre-raid bis and kind of stat priority and stuff like that. As a warlock, once you're level 60, how do you itemize? And we were talking a little bit about the raids and stuff like that. What's kind of the stat priority? What are you looking for on gear?
So ideally, you want hit rating because you don't have any hit rating. However, you can't get it. There's no chance for you to get hit rating. In Molten Core, if you look at all of the pieces of gear that you can get, and I know this is pre-raid, but if you look in Molten Core, there's still no items that really give you hit rating that you want. The only hit rating item that you're probably going to be able to get in the first patch of Classic WoW is the belt from Kirtanos in Sholomance. So your pre-raid bis is probably, depending on how they release the items, your pre-raid bis is only going to give you 1% hit rating. Other than that, you just want to go for spell power to increase your Shadow Bolt damage, your dot damage, your life tap, and crit. Crit is actually much more important than most players believe. For Warlocks, it's not just, I get a critical strike on my spell. Yes, good, whoop-de-doo. It's actually more highly rated because you have a chance to imply improved Shadow Bolt debuff, which every time you crit, your next non-periodic spells deal 20% more shadow damage. And that debuff is important to have up all the time, especially if you're not raiding with world buffs or they lock out world buffs and you're not allowed to use it for a certain period of time. Having that debuff up as much as you can is very important to increasing all of the Warlock's damage in your raid.
Very nice. Very nice. Then last time, and typically what I've been doing for all these deep dives is we kind of been going over pre-raid best and slot lists.
Sure.
But as you said, I'm not sure if it's entirely relevant, especially for warlocks and casters, just because so many things change. Are there a couple items off the top of your head where you're pretty confident that regardless of how Blizzard does things, these are going to be items you really want to get?
There are definitely items that are guaranteed to be in the game. Some items will be variable, some items are guaranteed. And we can go over each item if you like, and I can give the variables that may or may not be in the game.
Then let's go for it. Let's go for it. One at a time.
All right, so let's start off with the headpiece. The usual headpiece that people use before they get tier 2 or anything special is the green lens of Shadow Wrath. If it's in the game, sometimes there's not of Wrath gear in the game, but I feel like there will be in Classic. So you want green lens of Shadow Wrath. It'll give you 10 stamina and most likely 36 shadow damage. If that's not in the game, you can get Fellcloth Hood, which gives you 24 shadow damage, I believe. But there is an option that's better than both of these, and most people usually don't go for it because it's very expensive and not a lot of people think it's very good. And this hat that you can get is Cap of the Scarlet Savant. Cap of the Scarlet Savant is from Pristine Hide of the Beast, skinned off the beast in Upper Blackrock Spire, and it has a 1% chance to skin it, I believe. After you get this item, you can use it to do a quest chain requiring a bunch of other materials to pick a certain epic item that you want at the very end. caster has an option of getting this cloth helmet that gives you 20 intellect, which is 1/3 of a crit, and 2% crit. So basically, this helmet is giving you 2.3% crit, which is going to be better than actually having a Shadow Wrath green lens.
So this would be ideally the priority cap of the Scarlet Savant?
99% of the Warlocks you see will have green lens of Shadow Wrath or something like that, because this item is really rare, really hard to get, and usually Pristine Hide of the Beast goes for 700, 800, 900 gold. And early on in the server, when you actually want to have this item, getting that amount of gold is really hard, especially if you are trying to get your epic mount first, which you should. So most Warlock players are going to just be getting the Shadow Wrath one and trying to get their epic mount instead. But this one is slightly better.
Sounds good. Let's move on to the next slot.
Someone brought up a good point, though, in chat. They said no turban. There's a bunch of items that are way better than what I'm going to say for pre-raid bis. However, turban and items like this aren't introduced into the game until Scourge event before Nax, when the 0.5 dungeon set is released. This gear that was added to dungeons was meant for players to get to catch up to all the other players that have already been raiding. So it's much stronger, but it's not going to be in the game, hopefully, at the launch.
Yeah, and if you guys see here, I just brought up the stage rollout design philosophy for Classic. The Scourge Invasion is scheduled to be in Stage 4, meaning that in all likelihood, these new catch-up items will probably not be released until much, much later after Classic launch. So we're just going to operate under that assumption for now, because I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption.
Sure. As for the next piece, next slot, this also depends on what's going to be out. If there's no Darkmoon Fair, which usually comes out in Blackwing Lair patch, then you're going to want to get the neck from Hydrolash in Dire Maul East, which is 1% crit rating. If AV patches out and there's the first patch of increased dungeon loot gear, if AV patches out, then a new neck is going to come into the game in Sholomance from Vectis, and it's a pretty rare neck called Dark Advisor's Pendant. That's going to be pre-bis if it's out. If Darkmoon Fair's out, there's a neck that's slightly better than Dark Advisor's Pendant, called Orb of Darkmoon Fair, I believe. It's 22 spell power. And this costs a bunch of money because you need to turn in Darkmoon Fair tickets to unlock it. And it's only slightly better than Dark Advisor's Pendant. So if you have Dark Advisor's Pendant, I wouldn't recommend going for the Darkmoon Fair neck. You're better off spending your money somewhere else because it's less than a 1% DPS increase.
Sounds good.
Next would be the shoulder slot. And this one's a little bit volatile because if the updated PvP gear is in, you're going to want the updated blue PvP shoulder slot. If the updated blue PvP gear isn't in, you still can go for the level 58 blue set, and there's multiple different combinations you want for the 2-piece bonus of plus 23 spell power. And shoulder can be one of those slots, but it depends on what piece of gear you have at what time. If you don't have any of that gear, you're not PvPing, they haven't updated the PvP gear, etc., you typically just want to go for plus 30 Shadow Wrath green shoulders if Shadow Wrath is out. If Shadow Wrath is not out, you want to go for Fell Cloth shoulders, which is a tailoring pattern you can craft, and that increases your shadow damage by 26.
Now, you mentioned the PvP blues. How long would it take, from your experience, for a Warlock to rank up and get those blue PvP shoulders if they're updated?
If they're updated, you want to go for the rank 10 set, which is head shoulders. And to get rank 10 solo queuing, it may take you a while depending on what the brackets are on your server, which means how much people are PvPing and how much honor they're grinding when they are PvPing. So if you're solo queuing, it could take you a while. But if you're in a pre-made and you're really committed to PvPing, it won't take you long at all. Rank 10 is pretty easy to get. Beyond rank 10 is when it starts to really become a commitment.
So if you were to estimate like weeks?
In a pre-made, under 2 months maybe. It depends on how much honor you're really committed to getting. If you can skip a few ranks, you got enough honor to go from 5 to 7, then obviously you're going to get it faster, but it all depends on how much time you're really wanting to commit to PvP.
Of course. Let's keep going. Let's hit these kind of fast here a little bit if we can. We're just a little bit behind schedule.
Sure. The next item is the cloak, and the best cloak you can get is plus 21 Shadow Wrath if it's in the game. If it's not in the game, you can go for Heliotrope Cloak, which is 1% crit, or a cloak that's a little bit better would be Amplifying Cloak from Diremall East off of Magistrate. It's a bit rare of a drop, but it's plus 18, and if you can't get plus 21, that's the best you can get. As for chest piece, really the two options for chest piece are Robe of the Void and Robe of the Winter Night. Robe of the Void is an epic pattern that drops off a Gandling and Sholomance, and it's very rare. And it's only very slightly better than Robe of the Winter Night. And typically, early on in the server, when you want to get this item, gold is very important. Not a lot of people will have a bunch of gold just to waste on whatever they want. So usually, even in progress, when we're trying to min-max as much as we possibly can, I always recommend people to save their money and go for Robe of the Winter Night, because the damage difference is so small, and the amount of gold you have to spend on Robe of the Void is so much, and the amount of time you have to put in to grind Robe of the Void is so much, that you'd be better off spending that time and money on Epic Mount or PvPing or doing something more progressive. Next would be Bracer. Bracer, the best Bracer you can get is plus 21 Shadow Power if it's in the game, and even better than that is plus 21 Shadow Power with Fire Resistance off the Fire Boss in BRD. But if that's not in the game, the best Bracer you can get is Sublime Wrist Guards off any of the guards in Diremall North. Next is Weapon. And Weapon, there's a few different options that you can do. If AV is out, then you always want to go one-handed weapon with the AV Exalted offhand. And the one-handed weapon you would want to get is either Inventor's Focal Sword for 1% crit, which is slightly better marginally for single target for Warlocks. And if you're multi-dotting or in any sort of scenario where you're AoEing, you want Spell Power, where you can get Blade of the New Moon, which increases just shadow damage. For gloves is kind of like the helmet. Gloves, you can use Fellcloth gloves, which is a pattern in Diremall North when you open the box that the goblin is guarding. Fellcloth gloves increase your shadow damage and are very good in AoE type situations, but or you can go for a two-piece PvP set depending on what's out. But typically the gloves that I like to go for are gloves of Spell Mastery. You don't have to wait for any sort of drop to happen. You don't have to wait for a craft or anything. Gloves of Spell Mastery, a lot of people will get this recipe pretty early on. And these gloves, like the helmet, will also give you 2% crit rating.
Somebody's asking right now, what about the Maradon Dagger and the DMT Staff?
The DMT Staff is good if you haven't gotten AV Exalted yet. But the AV Exalted offhands are so good that it completely negates the Diremall Tribute Staff. As for the Maradon Dagger can be good depending on its PPM, depending on its proc per minute. So if it has a high proc per minute and you're gaining a lot of shadow damage through its proc, which it can proc through AoE spells as well, and you're gaining a lot of mana, which means you're life tapping less, it can be better than the other Priebus items that I listed. But it really depends on what the proc rate is that's going to be implemented into the game.
Important insight, absolutely.
As for belt, typically you want to just stay with your 1% hit belt. However, depending on what items are out, what BG reputation items are out, you can get a small mana igniting girdle version from AB reputation. You can get a belt that adds a little bit of crit, a little bit of spell power. I'm not sure if they're going to put that in the game right away or not. If they do, that's going to be pre-abyss. If not, you can go with Belt of the Archmage or the 1% hit belt off of Kirtanos. As for pants, You can use a 2-piece PvP set, like I stated before. If you're not going for that, you want to go for Sky Shroud leggings off the first boss in Lower Blackrock Spire. And this is something that's typically going to take a while for you to grind unless you're really lucky, because a lot of these a lot of casters are going to want these pants, and some healers are even going to want these pants, and they're not very common of a drop rate. So you're going to have to farm for that quite a bit. As for boots, if they have increased dungeon loot from the AV patch, the first round of increased dungeon loot, the best boots you're going to be able to get are Malachi's foot wraps from Strat Undead. If those are not in the game, you can get Omnicast boots, PvP boots, or Dragon Strider's boots, depending on what is released.
All right, you want to talk about trinkets real quick?
Sure. Trinkets, we don't really have much of an option. Again, there's more trinkets added later to the game when this Naxxramas dungeon set loot is put into the game. But early on in the game, you don't really have a bunch of options. Your only trinkets that you're going to be able to get are the Dire Maul class trinket, Briarwood Reed, and Eye of the Beast. Eye of the Beast is 2% crit rating. Reed is, depending on what patch, going to be 29 spell power, depending. It changes a little bit. And the book trinket that you can get from Dire Maul is just like Briarwood Reed, except it's slightly less spell power. I believe it's 23. So typically, the two trinkets you're going to want, ideally, is Briarwood Reed and Eye of the Beast.
There it is.
As for rings, there's a common misconception with rings. A lot of people, they'll rush to 60 and they'll buy the epic ring that's in the mid-30s called Underworld Band. Underworld Band adds 10 stamina and some shadow damage, which is patched later on, so I'm not sure exactly how much shadow damage it's going to give. This ring is good for PvP, and it's good early on, but it's not BIS. You'd be better off getting Eye of Ogremar. Well, it depends on what faction you play, but there's going to be a spell power ring that you can unlock through a BRD quest chain called Saving the Princess. That's going to be your pre-BIS ring. And then the second ring you should get is Maiden Circle, which is a BOE world drop ring that's blue. And it costs quite a bit of gold, but it's going to be your pre-BIS ring until you get something from Raid. If you can't afford Maiden Circle, a good alternative would be Unicorn Band, which increases your spell power by just a little bit, but it's better than nothing.
I think we hit every slot, right? Is there anything we missed?
No, I don't think so.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Very comprehensive best in slot list. And, every time we do these, again, we do this. A lot of people ask me, why are you going over best in slot list? There's a million lists out on the internet. Well, that's because pretty much every list that's out there does not take into account all of these different variables. Opening up a best in slot list and having that, next to you during Classic, you'll probably find that a lot of the slots are either, the items aren't in the game, they haven't been updated properly, or they're not, necessarily worth it. Like Alive said, some items cost a lot more gold than others. So it's very important to kind of understand the context of all of these items so you can make those decisions in a much more informed way. And again, I would advise you guys check out Alive's guide on classic.wowhead.com. I'm going to link it one more time in the chat before we move on.
And the guide that I released has a lot of information in it, but there's a lot of min-max, high-end information that's lacking that I intentionally didn't put in there because we don't really have enough information about what's going to be released for me to go into that. So if anyone has more questions, how to really go in depth with Warlock, Mage, or anything like that, there's going to be a Discord link on my YouTube. I can link the Discord link in the chat, and he's got it pulled up on the screen here. You can PM me anytime. I'm a really available person. I'll respond to any question you want, anytime you want, unless I'm sleeping.
Yeah, and there it is right there. His Discord link has been posted in the Twitch chat. Guys, again, he is a very available guy. I would, if you guys are planning on rolling a Warlock or at least considering it, I would definitely hop into his Discord, ask him questions anytime. You're an available guy, dude. Available guy.
Yeah, I've actually done I've actually done quite a lot of math spreadsheets. Math is what I specialize in, and a lot of really hardcore number crunching to find out how valuable penetration is, hit rating, etc. And a lot of the guides that you find out there that release this generalized information that could be right or wrong with itemization don't really formulate their calculations properly, because a lot of these guides use mathematical formulas that are the warlock, one singular warlock in a void, in a vacuum. It doesn't account in for the amount of damage you gain from crit by applying improved Shadow Bolt and increasing the shadow damage of all your raid members. It doesn't account for damage that you do to amplify your raid's damage. It only accounts for the damage that you, as a singular warlock, will do.
Yeah, very, very important point. Very important point. So now that we've got our gear, we've got our talents, we've got our raise. Let's move on to consumables and professions. We'll start off with professions before consumables, just because I think it's a little bit more all-encompassing. What recommended professions do you recommend for warlocks?
So for a warlock, if you really want to be a high-end raider, you have to get engineering. That's not a question. That's not a, well, maybe I can get engineering, period. End of story. After engineering, you can get whatever the hell you want. However, when ZG comes around in Blackwing Layer Patch, you must be 300 tailoring. And that's for the Bloodvine set. You don't have to have 300 tailoring to actually wear the Bloodvine set, but if you have 300 engineering, you activate the 3-piece bonus of the Bloodvine set. And the 3-piece bonus gives you 2% crit rating. And now you might say, oh, it's just 2% crit rating, not that big of a deal. In Classic WoW, you're not going to be getting many items that are game-breaking. They're totally going to change your character. They're huge. In Classic WoW, it's all about adding up the little things to make your character big. And missing out on 2% crit rating isn't really an option. You have to get it.
Quick thing about engineering. As a warlock, how do you utilize engineering in raids?
Okay, so as a warlock, your AoE is typically a bit weaker. It's weaker than Warrior Cleave. It's weaker than a mage doing Flame Strike, Arcane Explosion, etc. So to make up for this lack of AoE, anytime that you go in to Hellfire, which is your primary AoE ability, Hellfire does more damage than Rain of Fire. Rain of Fire has lower spell power coefficient, and it ticks slower than Hellfire does. So typically when I'm moving into position at Hellfire, I'll Sapper Charge, hit as many targets as I can, and then start channeling my Hellfire so I can get an initial burst of damage.
Absolutely. Do you use Arcanite Dragonling or anything like that? No?
Yeah, it's actually mandatory, at least in my guild, for everyone to have Arcanite Dragonling. However, you don't really use Arcanite Dragonling till the mages go fire, till fire is actually relevant, which is past Blackwing Layer. And it's mandatory that all raiders, healers, tanks, melee casters have Arcanite Dragonling, because the Dragonling itself doesn't do that bad of damage, but its breath attack, which is the one that applies the debuff, is timed. It doesn't do it non-stop. That's not its primary damaging ability. It only does it sometimes. And the Dragonling, the breath attack counts as a spell-based attack, which means it has a 17% chance to miss, and there's no way to give it hit rating. So you want to have as many of these Dragonlings out as possible so that you can get the maximum stacks of this buff onto the boss as fast as possible.
There it is. There it is.
Also, as a little tip, these Dragonlings or battle chickens or whatever summonable pet that you can get from engineering, it scales off your engineering ability. So the higher level your engineering, the higher level the pet that you will summon will be. So if you can summon a battle chicken or whatever it is and you stop exactly at that level, that chicken is going to be weaker than someone who actually maxed out their engineering. And on Alliance, as Gnome, you can have your pets be higher level than any other pet because you have slightly higher engineering level due to the Gnome racial. So a Gnome Arcanite Dragonling, I believe, is level 62 or 63, opposed to anyone else's who is going to be level 60, which means more chance to hit, more damage, etc.
All right. Sounds good for professions. Let's go ahead and move on to consumables.
As for consumables, there's a ton of consumables you can use, a ton, and most of them are very minimal. So I'll go over those later. But the big consumables you want to use are Flask of Supreme Power, Greater Arcane Elixir, Shadow Power Elixir, Major Mana Potion, Demonic Rune. Those are the damage increasing ones. And you might say, well, why do I need Major Mana Potion? Why do I need Demonic Rune? I have Life Tap. Why would I use those? Using potions and demonic runes doesn't cause you to have a global. Life tapping does. So let's say you make a macro to use demonic rune and major mana potion at the same time. And they both have a range of how much mana you can get back. But let's say you get on average 4,000 mana. You can use that instantly in between casts and keep casting to cast another 10, 12 shadow bolts. If you life tap, you're going to have to life tap 2 or 3 times, which let's say you have to life tap 3 times. That's 4.5 seconds worth of globals that you just used, which means you're missing out on 2 Shadow Bolt casts.
Yeah.
As for defensive consumables, you want to use protection potions like Greater Fire Protection Potion and Molten Core in Blackwing Lair, Greater Nature Protection Potion in Encourage, Greater Frost Protection Potion for Sephiron. These are all pretty typical. Doesn't matter what class you play. As a Warlock, your best friend isn't going to be a guildmate. Your best friend isn't going to be someone you do quests with. Those aren't going to be your best friend. Your best friend in the whole game is going to be a potion called Limited Invulnerability Potion. Trust me. When you play a Warlock, you'll understand. Warlock damage causes a lot of threat. And it's pretty usual, especially in dungeons, that you're not going to have any way of reducing your threat. So if you get a crit, your first Shadow Bolt crit, your first Shadow Bolt you cast is a crit, you're going to get threat immediately. And you're going to die immediately because you're wearing cloth. And if you have Shadow Wrath gear on or something like that early game, you have no stamina on your gear. You need Limited Invulnerability Potion to make you immune to all physical damage and allow the tank to have time to pick it back up. And on most private servers, I'm not sure if this is going to be how it works on Classic, while you're under the effect of Limited Invulnerability Potion, it acts as if it's Blessing of Protection. It's the same sort of buff that is on you, which means during the effects of Limited Invulnerability Potion, you're unable to generate more threat. Meaning, when you let's say you gain aggro on something, you pop this potion, you can keep casting Shadow Bolt and you'll stay at the amount of threat you were before you popped the potion.
So it's kind of like a blessing of salvation, sort of.
Kinda. I mean,
kinda, but it's fun. It's like,
salvation,
how long does limited vulnerability?
it just helps with 6 seconds.
6 seconds. There you go. All right, let's talk more. What other potions do we need?
Well, beyond these potions, this is when it starts to really get into min-max small additional effects. So you can use Elixir of Firepower, Elixir of Greater Firepower to increase your Scorch damage, to increase your Goblin Sabotage damage, because that does have a small coefficient on spell power, increases your Hellfire damage. You can use Major Troll's Blood Elixir to give you HP 5, which over the duration of a whole raid adds up to less healing, which means more mana for the healers. You can use Elixir of Fortitude for more health. You can use Gordok Green Grog. You can use Rumsey Rum Dark Label to increase your health, meaning less chance for you of dying and losing your potions or world buffs, etc. You can use Mage Blood Elixir after ZG is released for more mana regeneration, for less life taps. You can use Oil of Immolation. Oil of Immolation you can activate before you go into Hellfire. That way you do damage while you're Hellfiring each time your Hellfire ticks. And each time your Hellfire ticks, Oil of Immolation is also doing AoE damage to all targets near you. You can use Magic Resistance Potion on some fights to increase your base resistance, and so on. There's tons of things. Wizard Oil, depending on when they implement Wizard Oil, you can apply it to your weapon for spell critical strike chance and spell power. And the list goes on virtually forever. There's Juju that increase your fire resistance, and so on.
Yeah, Absolutely. So many consumables, so many things to choose from. These are definitely the main ones, though.
Correct.
And now that we kind of understand consumables, we're basically ready to raid here. Let's talk more about the raiding playstyle. That's the most relevant thing. How, not just rotation, but rotation and how you kind of play a warlock in multiple situations in the raid environment. I see you've got a breakdown here of single target and multi-target. Can you kind of break down how we can expect, or how warlock players can expect to play their class in Classic?
Yeah, so basically, like I said earlier, Warlock's really volatile, except out of mages, out of all the caster classes, you have the most multiplicative amplifying damage debuffs. So, like I listed there in the guide, you have Nightfall Axe, which increases all spell damage by 15%. So that's for all casters. But in addition to that, you have Curse of Shadows, which is 10%, Shadow Weaving, which is only for you and Shadow Priest, which is 15%, and then Improved Shadow Bolt, which is another 20%. So if you add all these together, you're gaining 60% more spell damage, which is huge compared to the arcane or nature damage from a boomkin, or the elemental damage from a shaman, or the elemental damage from a mage. However, like I said earlier, warlocks don't start out with any hit rating, which means sometimes if you have all these debuffs and you get a priest buddy to PI you, you can get a huge crit. You can see huge numbers pop up on your screen. Also, you can see 3 misses pop up on your screen, 4 misses pop up in a row, or 2 misses, 1 hit, and then another 2 misses, and you'll do no damage, and you'll be under the tank's damage, and people will make fun of you. But there's also going to be times where you crit 5 times in a row, and you can make fun of everyone else. Luckily, this smooths out later on when you get more gear. This is typically why in most expansions of WoW, warlocks are weak early and good late, because warlocks scale very well with gear. So for single target, usually what you do, it's pretty simple. You just keep corruption up if you have a corruption slot. Not all warlocks are going to have a corruption slot. You have to speak to your raid leader ahead of time to figure out how many corruptions you're able to use. If you're able to use a corruption, you approach the boss, put the curse on that you're assigned to put corruption up if you're able to put corruption up, and then cast Shadow Bolt. You don't want to clip your corruption, which means you don't want to put corruption up when it has 3 seconds left. You want to put corruption up ideally right as it finishes. Sometimes that doesn't always work out because it doesn't time up perfectly with your Shadow Bolts, but do the best that you can. If you can tell that it's not going to time up with your Shadow Bolt's a 2.5 second cast, and it's going to run out in 1 second, instead of Shadow Bolting, you can life tap so that you keep your corruption up at a higher percent uptime. Your other ability you can use is Shadow Burn. Shadow Burn's an instant cast ability that uses 1 soul shard. So a lot of people, you'll say, oh, well, I'm just going to use Shadow Burn every cooldown. It's instant. Why not? Well, that's not always worth it. Because let's say the only debuff you have up is Improved Shadow Bolt. It's going to consume a stack of Improved Shadow Bolt, and it has a lower spell power coefficient, less than half of the spell power coefficient than Shadow Bolt does. So that stack of Improved Shadow Bolt would be better used just with another Shadow Bolt. However, since the debuffs that we have for warlocks are percent damage increase, they scale directly with the damage done by the spell. So even though Shadow Burn doesn't have a very good spell power coefficient, if you have multiple of these debuffs up at the same time, then it's good to use during a boss fight. So let's say you have Nightfall Axe up, 5 out of 5 Shadow Weaving, Curse of Shadows. You can do a Shadow Burn. Or you have Improved Shadow Bolt up, Shadow Weaving, Curse of Shadows. Go ahead, do a Shadow Burn. If you have all 4 of them up, do a Shadow Burn. If you have 2 of them up in a PI, do a Shadow Burn. Otherwise, if you only have 2, don't do it. However, like I said earlier, if you're casting on a boss and you notice the boss is going to die soon, and you don't have enough time to fit in another Shadow Bolt, you know that the boss is going to die when your Shadow Bolt is at 2 out of 2.5 seconds. It's not worth casting the Shadow Bolt. You're better off ending the fight with a Shadow Burn. So let's say the boss is going to die in 1.5 seconds. You can just tell. You've played Warlock for a while. You can tell. You're better off not casting a Shadow Bolt, casting a Searing Pain, Shadow Burn, boom, end of the fight. The best way to end a fight is the boss dies right as your shadow burn goes off, and then the boss is dead. That's how you perfectly end a fight.
There it is. There it is. Monka, dude, this is a lot of really good information. I don't want to interrupt you.
Call me new to Twitch, but I don't even know what Monka whom means. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good that you don't. It's good that you don't know what it is. You're still pure, dude. You're still pure. You haven't descended into
Oh no,
madness
they're
yet.
gonna corrupt me.
Yeah, exactly.
Be gentle.
So is there anything else you wanted to go over to single target? Just do your thing, dude. I'm just freaking listening, dude. I'm taking this all in.
Well, single target, it really depends on the boss. Like for Chromagus, for example, it depends on what vulnerability Chromagus is using. If it's shadow vulnerability, you want to just pump out as many shadow spells as you can. So typically, playing a caster, whether it be mage, warlock, anything, there's no such thing as a rotation. There's only a priority list. So at the top of the priority list would be Frostbolt, Shadowbolt, etc. You want to cast as many of the high priority spells as you're able to. Although if you're not able to get those spells off, you start going down the list in priority. What can I fit in? You want as little amount of dead time as possible. So let's take Chromagus in, for example. Chromagus, you just want to pump as many shadow spells as possible. And if you see that the vulnerability is going to run out in 2-3 seconds and you don't have enough time for a Shadow Bolt, toss a Death Coil, toss a Shadow Burn in there. Just get as many spells in as you can. Same for Fire Vulnerability. Fire Vulnerability, it's not the most optimal to cast Soulfire. It's not the most optimal to cast Immolate over and over and over. The best DPS you can actually do is apply Immolate and then spam Searing Pain. Searing Pain causes increased amount of threat. It's 1.5 threat generated. So when you spam Searing Pain, you really have to watch KTM, watch your threat meters to make sure you don't go past the tank. But as long as you're under the tank, keeping Immolate up on Chromagus and spamming Searing Pain is the best fire damage that you're able to output. And then other than that, it really just depends on what boss you're on. Typically, like I said, you just want to follow a priority list, cast as many Shadow Bolts as you can. If you can't, go on to the next spell. Can I fit in a Searing Pain? Can I fit in a Shadow Burn? Etc.
Awesome. Honestly, I think this is a great time to turn it over to the viewers. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions for you.
Yeah, the more questions, the better. The more in-depth the question you can ask, the more like detailed, the better.
There you go. So, guys, everybody that's watching right now, if you have any questions about warlocks or raiding in general, Alive has played the game. He's also played mages a lot. He's played the game on a very broad and deep level. So, yeah, please.
Sorry. I know quite a bit of in-depth information about every class because I've played the game at a high level for such a long time. However, I specialize primarily in caster. I've done caster loot council for my guild from the beginning of the game to the end of the game on multiple different servers for the whole duration of the server. I've been caster management of Progress and many other top-end guilds, so that's primarily where I focus my attention.
There you go. And we'll start off with the first question from Digital Tyler, who asks, does using a shadow resist potion negate life tap damage and healing?
No, that's... So there's only been one private server where it does. Most of the time, how it's been scripted in the past, life tap will actually bypass that. I'm not sure how it's going to be on Classic, so I can't really give you an accurate answer as to what it will be, but I'd say it's better that it doesn't consume it on most fights. On fights like Sephiron or any fights where you're taking heavy damage and all the healing matters, obviously having it absorb your life tap damage is better, but I'd say overall it's best if it bypasses it.
Next question we have from Mr. GM. What's up, Mr. GM? He says, did you feel any difference with the classic demo on any classes?
No, the classic demo, at that level, you don't really have many talents. You don't really have many abilities to really test the mechanics in depth, to test the mathematical table. So I can't really give you any significant differences that I felt because of those reasons.
Straightforward and simple. The classic demo, obviously, there's a lot of things off on the classic demo in terms of just like, you know, they had the Legion raid frames and stuff like that. It's still very much a work in progress, but I think most of the classes themselves, all the talents were there and stuff like that. Next up, we have a question from Shala100 who says, how about Soul Harvester staff for pre-raid Biss? It has 1% spell hit.
So Soul Harvester staff, he's talking about the staff from a class quest chain where you go into Sunken Temple. And every class has some sort of item that they can get from this quest chain. However, usually this quest chain is not out upon launch. So this isn't a staff that you can get right away when you hit 60. Most likely. I'm not sure what they're going to release, so maybe it will be good. It'll be better than the Dire Maul tribute staff, but it won't be better than having AV offhand.
There's your answer right there. Next question from the real Thanos. He says, what are your thoughts on Doom Guards and their cripple? I used to use it as an SM room lock on certain encounters, but I don't know of others doing so.
So actually, Doom Guard is sort of like a little niche thing that I've been doing on a bunch of servers that a lot of Warlocks don't do because it's really dangerous. But Doom Guard is a demon that you can summon if you farm the Grimoire off the demons in Blasted Lands, or you can do a quest chain taking you into Dire Maul. To summon the Doom Guard, though, you need 5 people to click on the altar, and one of them will die. So most times in raids, you won't use this because having one person die means one person loses all their world buffs. Although the nice thing about Doom Guard is you can go into Demonic Sacrifice. You can Demonic Sacrifice your Succubus, get the 15% shadow damage that you would normally do anyway. And you can still get the Doom Guard out because technically the Doom Guard doesn't count as a summoned demon pet. If you summon any of your other demons, it gets rid of the Demonic Sacrifice buff. However, if you summon Doom Guard, since it's special, you can keep your Demonic Sacrifice buff and you can keep the demon. So there's no negative downside at all. And the Doom Guard actually does quite a bit of damage, has really good and useful abilities. The only bad thing is it has a chance to break, and that chance is increased when you have no hit rating. It goes off the hit table. So there will be times, especially early game, where if you try to do this in raid, it might break in the middle of a boss fight and come smack a healer or cast cripple on a melee, and the melee has increased attack swing time and 50% reduced strength, and it's really bad. But at the times where it doesn't break, it's really good. Most times, though, I would say that your raid leader is not going to allow it.
Unfortunate for all those Warlocks that wanted to bust out that Doom Guard. Here's a really interesting question from Sly Doggy, because I think this is a fan favorite question. He wants to know about tanking Twin Emperors as a Warlock. How does it work? How can you like make it work even better? What goes into that?
Okay, so tanking Twin Emperors is not really as intensive as a lot of people put it. Actually, you don't even need to maximize as much shadow resistance as a human possibly can. You want a good mixture between shadow resistance, stamina, and actual threat gain. Because if you're going for just stamina, just shadow resistance, your casters aren't really going to be able to do much damage to the boss because you're not generating that much threat. So typically, I go for a mix between hit, crit, and shadow resist. So, for example, Funeral Cuffs. Funeral Cuffs are shadow resistance bracers off of the second boss in Lower Blackrock Spire. Funeral Cuffs don't give any spell power, they don't give any hit rating, they don't give any crit, they just give shadow resist and I believe intellect, no stamina, I believe. So I usually bypass these for damage bracers. And then the most shadow resistance cape that you can get before AQ is Juno's Shadow. Juno's Shadow gives the most shadow resistance and it gives some stamina, but it doesn't really give crit, hit, or any spell power. So typically I'll go for the Epic Cape from the recipe that you can get in Dire Maul North from the box called Chromatic Cloak. Chromatic Cloak gives a little bit less resistance, but it gives 1% crit, meaning you can generate more threat. And as for actually tanking Twin Emps, it's really not that bad. Typically, you'll take the Twin Emperors over to the steps, whether it's on the near the entry side of the room or the other side. And all you really do is, right before your Emperor is about to teleport to you, you stand near his hitbox because he will automatically target the person nearest to him. So you just stand within the red circular hitbox. And then as soon as he teleports to you, you move away because he'll do an AoE ability that knocks you away from him, and you want to outrange that. So as soon as he teleports to you, you want to move about 5 to 10 yards away, and then just spam Searing Pain. And while he's not teleported to you, you just sit there and wait. You can summon a Void Walker, sacrifice it for his shield. You can do whatever you want to prepare yourself for when it comes to you. But other than that, you just wait. As for actual spells you use, pretty much you just spam Searing Pain as it's your highest threat generating, and use Shadow Ward every single cooldown that you can.
There you go. And the entirety of Twin Emperor's tanking right there from Alive. Rami asks a very interesting question. This is very long. It's going to have a long answer, I'm sure. It says, how do you feel about the current content release schedule? And I'll open it up here in the background so you can kind of see it as well if you forgot. How do you feel about it?
So, okay. So it's not the way that I would prefer it. Classic WoW is, and even for me, you know, I'm not a role player. I don't play the game casually. I play it competitively. But even for me, Classic WoW is a game that's all about the longevity. And increasing the amount of patches makes the game better. It makes you more invested in your character. It makes you play the game more. It would actually even be a good business move for Blizzard to keep their community more intact with their game. Because every single patch that happens, let's say Dire Maul's not out, then you're missing out on a bunch of Dire Maul guild. You can't get Sublime Risk cards. You can't get Dire Maul tribute buffs. You can't get the staff from Dire Maul. Let's say Azurgos and Kha'Zix aren't out yet. That means that you can't farm those. You can't get Fel infused pants from Kha'Zix. It makes your character weaker, and the weaker your character is, the more time you have to spend in the game actually progressing through raids. So I think the more patches, the better. The more patches, the more things you have to do, and the longer the server will survive. The less you'll see people raid logging. So ideally, I'd like the server to be launched in as many patches as it normally is. You know, it should be the initial patch with just Molten Core, no battlegrounds. And then we should introduce world bosses, which would be Kha'Zix and Azurgos. And then we introduce the first battlegrounds, then Dire Maul, then AV patch, then Blackwing Lair, then ZG, then War Effort with Emerald Dragons, and so on and so on. However, the more patches that we introduce, the more time and resource and money Blizzard has to expend to get there. So really, if the community wants more patches, you guys have to stand up for yourself and make your voices known. Tell people that you want more patches. Make it apparent that you want more patches and you want the game this way. We as a community are the people who even made Classic WoW come alive. So we as a community are the ones that can dictate what we will get. We just have to prove to Blizzard that that's what we want. If we don't prove it to Blizzard, they're going to release the game the most time and resource efficient way that they can.
Gamers rise up, dude. Gamers rise up. There it is. Speak up. You have the power. But no, I absolutely agree. Forums, every forum. There's the official Classic forums. There's the Discords. There's the Classic WoW subreddit. Any way to kind of put your opinion out about the patch progression, the better. Just keep spreading the word. And that's actually the topic of today's Classic Cast, guys, which starts in about an hour and 15 minutes here. So we got to wrap this up pretty soon. We'll take one more question. And then I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some of the stuff Alive is working on. This last question comes from Smoro, who says, isn't there one Warlock who has to have Imp for Blood Pact? Is it viable to go Master Demonologist for the threat reduction?
So this is a topic that has come up quite a few times. Oh, wait. Before we answer this, Simple asked a very important question. He said, ass or tits? Ass all the way, 100%. Anyways, about the threat reduction. It's come up a few times, especially on Horde. Threat is a larger problem on Horde because if you don't have a shaman in your group, you're not going to have any sort of threat reduction from the Tranquil Air Totem. And shamans are prioritized to melee groups because the whole reason you go horde is so you can play with Wind Fury. If you have a shortage of shamans, they're going to take it away from the caster group before they take it away from the melee group, which means you're typically going to not be having your threat reduction pretty often. However, it's common for people to raid with an imp out with SM Ruin, like we had talked about earlier, and you usually have one of those in the tank group. Although you don't go into Master Demonologist for the threat reduction, because if you go into Master Demonologist, you're missing out on too many damage increasing abilities. You're either going to miss out on Ruin, or you're going to miss out on Improved Life Tap, etc. The answer to this threat problem is to get a better tank. Not necessarily a better tank player, but gear your tank more properly, especially on Horde. As Horde, it's pretty common because everyone knows that there's threat problems. You know, warriors, rogues are getting Wind Fury procs, they generate more threat. It's quite common that the tank will get the first Band of a Courier off Ragnaros. The tank will get the first Drakefang Talisman, the first Chromatic Boots, and he'll get these hit rating items and crit rating items so he can generate more threat. And he'll go for more agility gear, for more crit and more hit gear than actual defensive gear. He'll get enough defensive gear to make it past the boss and get as much threat gear as he can get away with, depending on his healers and depending on what gear he has.
And I think that's a great way to end the Q&A section, guys. Alive, before we go, I want to ask you if there is one tip or trick you could teach anyone in the chat about Warlocks, what would it be? What is something you think every single Warlock must know going into Classic?
Going into Classic, I would say that Warlock has such a huge amount of spells, such a huge amount of abilities at its disposal. Try to think in the most min-max way possible. Don't just look at an ability and say, oh, that's cool. Look at an ability and think, what can I do to make this ability add more damage? What can I do to utilize this ability in my raids to increase my performance? I can use Fel Domination to instant cast a Void Walker for a shield if I'm going to die. I'm going to instant cast a Succubus. I'm going to use all of the abilities that you possibly can to increase your performance.
There it is, guys. Min-max to the core as a Warlock. Thank you so much, Alive, for joining us today and spitting that knowledge, enlightening us on how the class works.
No problem.
I appreciate it, man. And for everybody in the chat right now, I'm going to go ahead and link Alive's YouTube channel. He's just started off on YouTube. He's made a couple of videos with more to come. Please check him out. Please throw him a subscribe if you guys liked what he had to say today. But almost more importantly, I don't want to say more importantly, but almost more importantly, I will say you should definitely join his Discord channel, which I just linked in the chat as well. He's a great... yeah, please, go ahead.
And honestly, guys, if you join the Discord, a few people have joined my Discord, and they feel like they're bothering me asking questions. I'm not a super famous streamer. I'm not a super famous anything. So I'm just a guy that loves Classic WoW. So you're not bothering me by any means. The more people that join my Discord, the more people that tag me at Alive, ask me questions, the happier I am. I join my Discord all the time in voice chat, and I'd love to talk to you guys. I'd love to get more integrated into the community. That's really important for me. And even subscribing to my YouTube channel. I'm not really trying to get rich or anything like that. I just really want to talk to you guys, and I want to make the Classic WoW community a tight-knit community where we can all help each other and all improve as a whole.
Absolutely, and it's very awesome for him to be doing that. A lot of times high-end players are so busy with things like just playing the game and stuff like that. It's very rare to see a high-end player kind of descend from Mount Olympus and chill with us plebs, you know what I mean? So again, if you guys have any questions, he's a great resource to have, a rare resource to have, and just all around a beautiful blue-eyed young man with a very deep V-neck that's turning me on right now. There it is. There it is. Look at that. All right, we got to end the stream because we got to get busy, me and him. But no, for real, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Alive, thanks once again.
No problem at all.
That's his Discord channel one more time. I got to end the stream, guys. We got to go prep for Class Cast, which is going to be live in 1 hour on SFan's channel. Alive, thank you so much, man. And any final shout-outs?
Thank you. Yep, shout out to my dog. He really has to pee, and he's kept quiet this whole time. So shout out to him.
He's a good boy. He's a good boy. All right, man. I'll talk to you later, dude.
Bye.
Peace.